Welcome to the Bush Air Podcast. I'm CC Pocock. Well, today is one of the episodes that a lot of people have been looking forward to. It's all about short-field takeoff and landings, otherwise known as STOL or STOL. And that's stall, not stall. You don't want to stall during a stall takeoff and landing. Many of you have watched STOL competitions on YouTube or even attended one. Some of you have even competed or currently compete in STOL competitions. And the next time you watch a STOL competition, pay attention to how the pros take off and land incredibly short. I can guarantee you that they would not be doing so or winning any STOL competitions by using the techniques mentioned in the pilot's operating manual or handbook, or the way you were taught in flight school. Another thing, and very important, look at the tailwheel section and the spring or stinger on some of the tailwheel airplanes. You may notice lead weights attached to the spring or stinger. Why? Because real STOL pilots know that without that lead weight, they will not do very well in the competition. This is to create an optimum center of gravity, as I have mentioned many times in the past. Optimum CG is critically important for not just the safe operation of the aircraft, but in order to obtain the best results you can out of the aircraft. The main advantage here is that optimum center of gravity creates a lower stall speed. I only mention tailwheel because you can see the ballast on a nosewheel airplane because normally it's hidden inside the fuselage. So before attempting an extreme short-field takeoff or landing, several critical things have to be optimized. First and foremost, know your airplane. Go back to the second episode where I explained the familiarization and test flight procedure to become truly hand-in-glove and safe with your airplane prior to attempting any real-world STOL operations. Next, optimum center of gravity, optimal use of flaps, optimal use of pitch and power, optimal energy management, and skill and proficiency flying at way below the power of stall speed. And the last one, which I believe most pilots are non-proficient and skilled in, and are an accident waiting to happen during a STOL operation or a STOL contest, and we've had a few already in the past. Proficiency and skill in maintaining control of a stall close to the ground. Okay, now I'm going to explain how to do an extreme real-world short-field takeoff based on what I've just mentioned. Once again, before attempting any extreme short-field takeoff or landing, several critical things must be optimized. Again, let's cover it again. Very important. Optimum center of gravity. Again, this is the key thing here. Optimal center of gravity. Correct initial flap setting. Maximum available engine power and propeller thrust, proper aircraft configuration, pilot skill, proficiency, and technique. A successful short-field takeoff begins way before the aircraft actually starts moving on the ground. Obviously, we will need maximum power for takeoff. So let's talk about piston engines firstly. Always warm the engine to normal operating oil temperature, not just cylinder head temperature. A properly warmed internal combustion engine produces more horsepower than a cold one. Hot oil is less viscous than cold oil, reducing the effort required to drive the oil pump and allowing more engine power to be converted into useful thrust. What about mixture adjustment? Adjust the mixture at maximum static RPM. And how do we do that? By observing the RPM and EGT, and you slowly lean the mixture out until you see a maximum obtainable RPM indication. A reciprocating engine's power output is primarily indicated by RPM and manifold pressure. Always know the maximum static RPM specified for your aircraft. The higher the static RPM, the more power available for both the takeoff, roll, and initial climb. Aircraft fitted with cruise propellers are generally not well suited for any short field or high density altitude operations. Aircraft equipped with variable pitch or constant speed propellers should achieve or come very close to red line static RPM and should maintain the red line RPM during the takeoff and the climb. Turning off unnecessary electrical equipment can free up a small amount of additional engine power, sometimes a huge amount of additional engine power. Reducing electrical demand decreases the workload on the alternator or generator. So, turning off your generator alternators, your engine's going to produce more horsepower, especially if you have a low battery. Once safely established in the climb, the alternator or generator can be turned back on to recharge the battery. Air conditioning. I'm sure not too many of you have air conditioners in your bush plane, unless you're flying an aircraft like the Cirrus or whatever, which you shouldn't be operating out in the bush anyway. If the aircraft is equipped with an air conditioner, it should never be used during takeoff, obviously. Air conditioning systems consume a huge amount of engine horsepower and reduce takeoff performance. So from a bush flying perspective, air conditioning also adds weight, reducing useful load and overall aircraft performance. So it's not very practical to have an air conditioner in a bush plane. Outside air temperature. The cooler and the denser the air is, the more power the engine can produce and the more efficiently the propeller can operate. And obviously you'll have a lower density altitude. This is one reason why aircraft performance generally improves during cold weather, right? And deteriorates during hot, high-density altitude conditions. And I guess I don't need to mention that a good headwind also helps. What about maximum power for takeoff with turboprop engines? We'll briefly talk about that. The turboprop engine output power is measured by a torque meter, not the RPM, like in a piston engine. Torque may be displayed in percent foot-pounds, PSI, whatever, depending on the aircraft. And unlike piston engines, a turbine engine's available power for takeoff is usually limited by turbine temperature rather than RPM. So maximum takeoff power is therefore largely determined by interstage turbine temperature, ITT. The optimum short field takeoff speed is the speed at which the aircraft can become airborne in ground effect but cannot yet safely climb out of ground effect. This speed is below the out of ground effect power on stall speed. Okay, now already with full power and full flaps, we'll get to that in a minute, you're at an incredibly low speed. And the aircraft could fly in ground effect at this speed. But outside of ground effect, it may not fly. It may stall. It would probably stall. In some cases, this may be zero indicated on the ASI. I know in my Experimental 170, it's below zero during takeoff and landing. Nose wheel and tail wheel airplanes, the techniques pretty much are the same. With a nose wheel airplane, maintain a steady positive back pressure throughout the takeoff roll. And tail wheel airplanes, you need to raise the tail enough to be able to unstick or rotate. Raise the tail as early as possible during a short field takeoff, but when it is ready to raise, don't force it up early because of gyroscopic precession and elevator drag. If you're pushing forward on the stick and the tail is not coming up, all you're doing is just exerting yourself for no reason, and you're creating elevator drag, which is actually going to extend your takeoff roll. So if you push forward on the stick and the tail starts coming up, that's the optimum time to start raising the tail. Some tail draggers, you can actually raise the tail on the brakes, and you see this in some STOL competitions. I used to do that with my Experimental 170. But in the backcountry, it's not really possible to do this, especially when you have a lot of gear, a lot of cargo in the back of the aircraft. So why do we raise the tail in a STOL competition? And I've read quite a few comments from people on social media where some pilots claim it's not necessary and we're just showing off by raising the tail, standing on the brakes on the white line, and then, then releasing the brakes and rolling. Well, obviously these people don't know what the hell they're talking about. Whatever you do in an extreme short field takeoff, you're doing in order to achieve the best results possible. With the nose wheel airplane, the tail is already up in the air. You already have a good centerline thrust where you need it. And no gyroscopic precession, right? Because you're not raising the tail. In a tailwheel airplane, there are 4 things that will try and pull you off the runway during takeoff. 1 is torque, 2 is P-factor, 3 is slipstream, and 4, gyroscopic precession. Okay, and those of you that have never flown a tailwheel airplane, you wouldn't know what that is, or you probably have not experienced the effect of gyroscopic precession. Tailwheel pilots have. Think about this. During the takeoff, you have the first 3 trying to pull you off to the left of the runway, okay? That is, of course, if your prop is turning to the right. In American airplanes, normally that is the case. And then to make it even worse, when you raise the tail, especially if you raise the tail at the wrong time, like too early, try and force the tail up, the gyroscopic precession tries to pull you to the left as well. So just making things worse. And now you may have full right rudder, maybe even a bit of right brake to try and maintain directional control during the takeoff. So it makes sense that if the tail is already up when you release the brakes and the tail starts coming down slightly during the roll and, of course, the rotation, that the gyroscopic precession now wants to pull you off to the right and not the left. Okay? Therefore, canceling out the other 3, trying to pull you off to the left. And the result, obviously, is a shorter takeoff. It's a shorter takeoff. Simple as that. And that's why some pilots raise the tail high into the air, standing on the brakes prior to starting the takeoff roll. And in most cases, this technique is used in the STOL contest because there's not much weight in the back of the aircraft, so it makes it easy to raise the tail. Allow the aircraft to indicate when it is ready to fly at the right moment. Now, I can't tell you what that is. You need to practice and learn your airplane at the right moment. Apply more flap as required. And at a STOL contest, we would always use full flap. Okay, have a look at all the guys. Everybody's using full flap. As whatever you have, you use. Okay, and then rotate, or rather unstick. So the moment you yank the flaps, and of course it's electrical aircraft with electric flaps, there's a lot of delay there, quite a few seconds delay, around 5 seconds or so. And so of course most bush planes have the manual flaps or Johnson bar lever, which you can just yank straight away and apply the flaps when you need them, and you're in there. So you always apply the flaps first, and then you rotate almost simultaneously. But if you pull back on the stick before you've applied your flaps, the aircraft's going to stay on the ground. Once the airplane's in the air, you lower the nose, immediately lower the nose, so you can start accelerating immediately, okay, and remaining ground effect, and then gradually retract the flaps to around the first notch, which is normally the optimum lift flap setting, while accelerating to a safe climb speed, and then, of course, you can slowly retract the remaining flaps. Ground effect is your friend during an extreme short field takeoff because you would be in the air already at below power off stall speed, and in some cases at the full power on stall speed, depending on the aircraft again, and the modifications that you've got to the wings of the aircraft and so forth to enable this to be possible. So always use ground effect to accelerate before attempting to climb out of it. Now, here's a video clip where I'm demonstrating a short field takeoff in my experimental 170. And you'll notice the flaps and when they are applied. I'll also play it back in slow motion so you can clearly see when I start with the flaps, normally around about first notch of flap, and then at the right moment I'll go full flap and unstick. The aircraft could get into the air, and then a slight lowering of the nose, a quick acceleration. As I'm accelerating, I would then retract the flaps and then continue the climb out. Okay, I won't tell you. Okay. I won't tell you how short the takeoff was. I'll leave that up to you all to discuss. The first person to guess the correct distance in the comments section below the video here will win a copy of my Bush Mountain Flying book, which, by the way, you can order directly off of the Bush Air website. The URL is at the bottom of the screen over here. All right, now let's talk about the extreme short field landing. A short field approach is always done with full flaps and at your minimum safe stabilized approach speed, which is a little bit above the stall speed. Remember, power controls your glide path, pitch maintains the optimum speed. So don't drag it in. Never drag it in. I see this so many times. I see this, and people come to me for training, and the first thing they do when we're doing an assessment flight is they start dragging the thing in. This is extremely dangerous and very amateur. And even if there's instructors out there teaching this, that the only way to land short is to drag it in over the bushes and the fence and then chop the power, chop and drop. This is the wrong way to do it. Keep a steep, stabilized approach at all times. You can land just as short, okay? In fact, shorter, with a steep approach than dragging it in over the obstacles. Dragging it in is extremely dangerous. You've got no altitude beneath you in case you have stalled or had a decrease in a gust of wind. It's an accident waiting to happen. Very amateurish to drag an airplane in to land for any form of landing, not just short field. So always keep a steep, stabilized approach. This is pretty much what your angle looks like, all the way down, all the way down, all the way down, all the way down, like that. That's how we do the approach. Whether it be a normal approach or a short field approach, it's always a steep, stabilized approach. Never drag it in. Look what happens when you drag it in. Look at the angle of attack. You're behind the power curve. Your nose is up in the air. When you're doing a steep, stabilized approach like this, you're not behind the drag curve. Plus, you've got all this altitude over you, and you can do it slower than what you can do it like this, okay, and safer. All right, don't drag it in. Steep, stabilized approach at minimum safe stabilized approach speed. Round out in ground effect just prior to the touchdown spot, then reduce some power, raise the nose to slow down further, and immediately without delay reapply sufficient power to keep the airplane in the air and to get to the touchdown spot at the slowest possible speed. And right now you'll be way behind the power curve, dragging it in, but only a few feet just prior to your, once you clear the obstacles and all that, and you get down to ground effect. Let me see if I can use the model to explain this to you. You're coming down, steep, stabilized approach. You get into ground effect. And before you hit the ground, you're going to obviously round out. Okay, in a normal landing, you'd round out and just continue in ground effect until you get to your touchdown spot, and then you'll reduce the power and land. In a short field, as you're getting into ground effect, you are pitching up. Sometimes you need to reduce a lot of power, cut the power, maybe don't touch the power, maybe it all depends, as required. But you want to be able to raise the nose as you get into ground effect without ballooning. If you balloon when you raise the nose, you're too fast. So you need to reduce the power first, okay, and then raise the nose. And then what's going to happen now is if you don't reapply the power, you're going to settle down onto the ground. And you don't want that to happen. So into ground effect, you reduce power, you raise the nose, your airspeed decays towards the stall, you reapply the power. Because if you don't reapply the power, you're going to continue coming down, okay? And without power, your stall speed is going to be higher as well, because the more power you have, the lower the stall speed. And that will carry you in that high attitude towards the touchdown spot. And when you arrive there, that's when you reduce the power, pull the stick back even more. And as you touch down, obviously you're going to be on the brakes. And you're going to take the flaps all the way up. And that is how we do an extreme short field landing. Any excess speed in ground effect. Sorry, I have to laugh at this because I've been, just before I, while I was scripting this episode, I was watching a few YouTube videos of flight instructors teaching short field landings. I get about halfway through, I'm like, okay, this is just a joke. Look, the way short field landings and takeoffs are taught at flight school level, your average flight instructor at your regular flight school, it's okay for, your regular airport or, a short-ish kind of, normal runway somewhere. But in the backcountry and STOL competition flying, the real world STOL, those techniques don't work. If you're at the right airspeed, at the minimum safe stabilized approach speed, when you get into ground effect and you do everything right and you get the nose up and your stall warning's blaring away and your airspeed indicator is pretty much on zero already and you're still flying the aircraft, this is where you need to be in order to achieve the absolute shortest possible short field landing. If there's any float after coming off the power, any float at all, you're too fast. And you're going to obviously waste landing area. Okay, and that's not an extreme short field landing. So no floating. If you're not behind the power curve, you're going too fast. It's going to extend the landing roll. It's going to reduce the landing accuracy. Obviously, you're going to land way past where you're aiming to land. Okay, and it's going to require a lot more heavy braking to try and get the thing to stop in a short space. So again, if the aircraft floats after power reduction, the approach was too fast, and the landing is no longer a true short field landing. In such cases, the only way to fix it is when you arrive over your touchdown spot and you come off that power and the airplane doesn't want to land, take the flaps up. Take the flaps up. You'll take the lift away from the wings and the aircraft will sink down to the ground, and then you can use the brakes to slow down. That's the only way to fix it. Unless, of course, you can go around, and in some cases out in the backcountry, for instance, it's a one-way in, one-way situation, so you're committed. And in these instances, when it's a one-way in, one-way out, when you arrive on short final, you need to be very sure that you're configured correctly. Taking the flaps away is like landing a helicopter. Because those of you that are helicopter pilots would be familiar with the collective. And of course, the flap lever on like a Cessna, for instance, can be used similar to the collective on a helicopter. I've demonstrated this many times. I've had a few chopper pilots here, and we go fly the fixed wing like a helicopter. We leave the power on, we set the power, don't touch the power, and we land and take off just using the flap lever. So the flap lever, or the flaps, in many cases is a very valuable control surface that most pilots are never really taught how to use. I mean, in flight school, you use, some instructors don't even teach your students to take off with flaps. But normally after landing, you land, and then whatever flaps you landed with, you'll retract them after coming to a stop, and then you'll, after landing checklist and all that kind of stuff. But the flap lever, or the flaps, is a very, very useful control surface. Okay, so the objective is simple. Arrive at the touchdown spot as low and slow as possible to be able to stop in the shortest possible distance. Something to note, a 10%, just a 10% increase in your touchdown speed, 10% increase in your touchdown speed results in about a 20% increase in landing distance. So it's critical. And we're talking about precision here. Everything we're talking about now is precision. This is extreme short field takeoff and landing, absolute precision flying. So here's another video. This one is of, I'm demonstrating a short field landing in my experimental Cessna 170B. Again, I will not mention the distance that I landed in, same as the takeoff. I'll leave that up to you all in the comments again. And yeah, the first person to guess the correct distance, stopping distance or landing distance there in that video, will receive a copy of my Bush and Mountain Flying Handbook. So it could be two separate people, the one, you know, for the takeoff distance as well as the landing distance, two separate videos, or one person may be lucky and get them both. Okay? And then you'll be receiving a copy of my Bush and Mountain Flying Handbook. Okay, well, that's it. That's the real world extreme short field takeoff and landing technique. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of pros watching this video right now. I can assure you all that what I've just explained to you is pretty much the most extreme way of landing and taking off in a general aviation light aircraft. However, big warning. Those of you that haven't done this before, for those of you who are only familiar with the POH method or the way you were taught in flight school, please don't go and start practicing this sort of stuff off, you know, just right off the bat. Just, you know, it looks easy on YouTube. When you see STOL competitions out in the backcountry landing short and taking off short, it looks easy, but there's a lot of hazards involved, okay? Please get to know your aircraft and practice coordinated and uncoordinated slow flight STOL recovery with minimal loss of altitude prior to attempting real-world STOL or STOL competitions. STOL recovery without wing drop must be automatic muscle memory action. Okay, I can't emphasize how important this is. We have seen in the past there are far too many STOL spin accidents. And all of this, STOL spin accidents are mostly a result of gross pilot error and a result of pilots that are non-proficient in STOL recovery or coordinated flight, slow flight. Whatever the case is, if you don't practice STOL recovery, if you don't practice coordinated STOLs and uncoordinated STOLs, which means a wing drop, recovery from a wing drop during a STOL. If you don't practice this over and over and over again so that it becomes automatic, you're probably not going to be able to fix the situation when it occurs to you on short final approach during a short field landing. Not going to happen. Because you haven't got time to think about how should I do this, or make a mistake and say, oh, that didn't work, let me try another technique. No, there is only one way, and that is the right way, and you have to practice it to the point where it becomes muscle memory, instinctive muscle memory. You don't even think about it. Your aircraft stalls, you recover, no matter what height you are above the ground. And if you're not capable of doing this because you don't practice enough, you're going to crash. That's it, simple as that. So please, again, extreme short field takeoff and landings can become a lot of fun when you realize what you can actually do with your airplane. And watch the National STOL series, for example. You'll see many different types of aircraft, from experimental right through to all kinds of certified airplanes, doing amazing things. But it takes a lot of skill to do this, and a lot of practice, and not just the skill. Having skill for landing and taking off super short and winning STOL competitions, for instance, is one thing. But as skilled as and proficient as you are in achieving those results and those extreme short field takeoff and landings, are you, ask yourself this question, are you as skilled and proficient in preventing an accident from happening if you accidentally stalled on takeoff or landing in an extreme short field operation? Think about it. Just think about it. We've seen some fatalities. We've seen some STOL spins during STOL competitions as well as out in the backcountry. And that's mostly as a result of the pilots being non-proficient in STOL recovery. So everything I have just described during this episode is in my Bush and Mountain Flying Handbook. Okay. To order a copy, you can go to my website, Bush Air, It's also available on Amazon. And hope you all found this episode helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe. And until next time, fly safe.